Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Dan Borsche, coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people. The federal government has announced it plans to expand one of its signature housing policies to allow people on higher incomes to buy more expensive properties. The Help to Buy scheme allows home buyers to co-purchase their home with the government. This lowers the size of the deposit and mortgage needed to get into the property market. Under the changes, income caps and property price caps will rise. For singles, the income limit is currently $90,000, set to rise to $100,000. For couples and single parents, the limit is $120,000. Under the changes, it will go up to $160,000. Taking a look at the property price caps in some of our capital cities, caps are tied to the median house price in each region. In Sydney, the new cap is $1.3 million, up from the current limit of $950,000. Brisbane will be $1 million, up from $700,000. And in Melbourne, it goes from $850,000 to $950,000. Housing Minister Claire O'Neil says the changes will open up the scheme to a wider range of people.
We've got a generation of young people growing up in our country who can't see a pathway to home ownership, and our government wants to change that. Now, Help to Buy is going to help 40,000 people who would otherwise have no real chance of home ownership get into a home of their own, and our government absolutely stands behind that.
Political reporter Olivia Casely joins us now from Parliament House. Olivia, what's the reaction been to this announcement today?
Well, as you ran through there, the Albanese government wants to make its Help to Buy scheme more accessible for more Australians. So they're going to be increasing their share of contributions so that more Australians can get on the property ladder. And this funding boost is essentially going to cost $6.3 billion to the taxpayer. But when it comes to the politics of this legislation, Help to Buy, was politically contentious. It only passed at the end of last year. It was initially opposed by the Greens, and the Coalition have never been in favour of a shared equity scheme such as this. They argue that Australians don't want to co-own a property or a home with the government. We heard similar arguments from the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, this morning. He is in Tasmania, and he is essentially levelling blame at the Albanese government when it comes to housing affordability issues more generally.
The Labor government, the Albanese government's created this housing crisis by bringing 1 million people in over the course of just 2 years, which is the biggest intake in our country's history. They have allowed the CFMEU to run riot across the building sector. So we've had a record number of building companies which have gone broke, and it's forced up the cost of construction. The government's flagship programs haven't built any houses, and the government can be out there talking about wanting to co-own homes with people, but young Australians don't want Anthony Albanese sitting at the kitchen table with them talking about the joint home that they've just purchased.
When it comes to some of the expert reaction, we did hear from the Professor of Urban Planning, Nicole Gurran. She works at the University of Sydney this morning. She says that generally this policy is just tweaking around the edges, but she does believe that there is room for shared equity schemes and they do have value.
I do think there is an appetite for equity sharing schemes, and they can work very, very well. Obviously, it won't be people's first choice, but it does reflect the barriers to first home ownership that we see now in Australia.
As we know, the federal election is just around the corner, and interestingly, when Australians head to the ballot box, millennials and Gen Z are going to outnumber baby boomers for the first time. Housing affordability is one of the key issues of concern to this cohort. So this announcement today, this increase to the contribution that the government chips in on Help to Buy, is directly to appeal to these voters.
Yeah, interesting times. Political reporter Olivia Casely reporting from Parliament House. And to get more on this news, I'm now joined by Professor of Housing Research and Policy at the University of New South Wales, Hal Pawson. Professor, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Initially, what's your reaction to this announcement today?
Yeah, I mean, I saw your clip there with Nicole Gurran, and she said it's really more of a tweak to an existing policy. So it's nothing very dramatic. But I think what it's doing is it's recognising that about 3 years has elapsed since this policy was originally announced, because it was one of the policies that Labour went to the election with in 2022. And both incomes and house prices are significantly higher now than they were then, especially house prices, but also incomes in cash terms. So what the policy announcement from last night is it's a recognition that the property price limits, which are allowed within the scheme, and also the people who are eligible for the scheme, or the incomes, also need to be slightly changed, because we've moved on by 3 years, and government then has to also make a similar adjustment in the budget, because the cost of providing that level of help for people who are eligible for the scheme, that's a 30% or 40% contribution to the cost of a new home. That 30 or 40% is a little bit more expensive now than it was in 2022. So that's what this extra funding that's being announced in the budget will mean.
And given that, to borrow that term, Professor, of that perhaps this is more of a tweak, would you expect, if this were enacted post an election, that this would improve housing affordability?
Well, I think it's beneficial to the people who can qualify, and probably those who can qualify who maybe get in there first or are selected, because I suspect there's going to be, and this is going to be an oversubscribed programme. So for that group, yes, it's limited to 40,000 households over 4 years, so 10,000 a year. It's not a huge scheme in those terms, but I think it complements other ways that government already provides or offers help to first home buyers especially through the first home guarantee scheme, which exists already, was created, in fact, by the Morrison government, and this government has not only continued that scheme but expanded it. That already exists, and that provides help to a much larger number of people already. So this is adding on to that, and it's adding on to it in quite an important way, because it's targeting help slightly lower down the income spectrum. And I slightly query the way that you frame this segment, because when you say it's now being targeted to higher income groups, well, higher than the very low numbers that were announced in 2022, yes. But the requirement to be earning less than $100,000 if you're a single person, or less than $160,000 if you're a couple, those income levels are still fairly modest for people who might be in the market to become first home buyers.
I think that's a really good point. I guess higher, we're referencing in terms of higher than it was before, rather than high income.
Fair point.
I think that's a fair distinction that you make. Just, Professor, on that number of 40,000 over the 4 years, do you have a sense of what the kind of number of demand would be?
Well, we know that there are about 100 to 120,000 first home buyers already. In the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen about 120,000 first home buyers per year. So the numbers there are quite substantial. And the aim of this scheme would be to slightly expand that. Probably some of the people who benefit from it would be people who would have bought anyway. But there will also be, if the scheme is successful, some people who are helped into home ownership who would otherwise be permanently excluded from it. And that's quite a big achievement if you've got a policy which does that, especially when it's a policy which in the medium term actually costs government nothing. In fact, government makes a profit from it. So this is quite different from first home owner grants or stamp duty concessions, which are just giveaways where there's no return to government at all. The shared equity model, which is what this Help to Buy scheme is quite different from that, because what it really is it's easier to understand. It's an interest-free loan. That's essentially what people are benefiting from, but it's an interest-free loan that comes with a catch or a condition, which is that when you repay it, you repay an amount which also reflects the value gain of the home. So government gets a share of any capital gain which has occurred over that period. So government not only gets its money back, government gets its money back probably with some additional, with some gain that's related to the inflation of the property market over that time. So from a sort of public finance point of view, this is a really quite a smart policy.
Well, and particularly if the market grows like we've seen over many, many years. Just in terms of shared equity, there's a whole range of views that you would be aware of about them. Some saying this is a great model, it has all of these benefits. Others saying that it actually artificially increases prices and inflates the market. Do you see that as a risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the schemes that some of the ones I've just mentioned and others over the last 10, 20 years have been about making it, assisting people who are buying housing. And when that happens, you're enabling people to pay a bit more or offer a bit more for a house, and there is an inflationary impact of that. But when you're only talking about 10,000 people per year at a maximum, and when that's assistance which you're going to have to repay at a later point, I think this, compared with things like, for example, the home builder project, the home builder scheme, which the last government launched in the midst of the COVID crisis, that was enormously inflationary as a giveaway grant that had no, there was no public finance, or there was no return to the taxpayer. So I think, yes, in a very small way, it will have a very small inflationary effect on house prices. If you were doing it 2 or 3 times the size, perhaps it's something we should be more concerned about. But I think at this scale, it really won't have a big impact in that way.
Yeah, perhaps relative to the size. Just finally, is the issue, Professor, that we're not talking about, that's not on the political agenda, the big one, and that's around capital gains and negative gearing?
Well, yes. I mean, your earlier question was what's the effect of this on housing affordability more generally? The answer is not very much at all. Very beneficial for those that can benefit, can qualify, but for other people, really, it's going to have a tiny impact. Whereas the kinds of tax reforms that you're referring to there could have a significant impact on the market price across the board. And so that's why in my opinion, and I think many other academics and industry experts would say that those kinds of tax reforms are things that the next government really will need to look at again.
Professor of Housing Research and Policy at the University of New South Wales, Hal Pawson, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.